Good evening. I was just thinking that it was just about 2 months ago that I was giving the Dharma talk in the Zendo, and I recognized many of the residents from my really wonderful 3 weeks there. And it just really fills my heart with joy to see you and also to recognize many of the people online as well. So this magical community that comes together through the blessings of the internet, which I almost didn't have today. So I am feeling particularly grateful for working internet access. I'm in the mountains of southeastern Arizona at a small and lovely retreat center here called Dharma Treasure. Al may know of it. It's in the Cochise Stronghold, which is a very powerful place where Cochise and his people evaded the US military for a long time. It's cliffs and mountains, and right now the creek is running, and it's full of birds. It's full of the beginning of springtime. It's quite a place to be, but really poor internet. So I'm so happy that it's all worked out, and hopefully throughout this whole talk, you'll be able to hear me. And so never take such a thing for granted, I think, is the lesson there. As I mentioned, I'm here because I was just leading a retreat from the Hidden Lamp, and Kodo did such a nice job of introducing it. I'll just say a little bit more. It's 100 stories from the time of the Buddha through the 20th century of awakened women, with commentaries, reflections by contemporary women teachers. And it just so happens that the theme for the spring 2023 practice period is the Pang family, Layman Pang and his daughter and son and wife, laywoman Pang. And because there are women in the stories and koans of Layman Pang, number of them are included in the Hidden Lamp, and some of those were made into a little resources page for you, a little list of those stories that is part of the resources page for the practice period. And if you've spent time with those, maybe I haven't been able to listen to the talks due to my poor internet connection, but a number of them feature Ling Zhao, who was Layman Pang's daughter, also considered a very awakened person. And Ling Zhao's name actually translates as, let's see, where is it here? I'm looking at my notes while I'm talking. So her means spirit shining in Chinese. So she definitely had a shining and also very playful spirit. She was clearly very close to her father. They traveled around together selling baskets. And one of the really great stories from the collection, the recorded sayings of Layman Pang, is the story of Ling Zhao's helping, which is in the book and in your resources. And that's really going to be the theme of this talk. Those of you who are in the practice period probably know that my old Dharma friend, who I practiced at Tassajara with, Charlie Picorni, gave a talk earlier in the practice period also on this koan. But one of the wonderful things about koans is you could probably hear a talk on the same koan every night for a month, and each one would be completely different because different people and different things to bring forward. So Charlie and I decided that since we both wanted to talk about Ling Zhao's helping, that we would both talk about Ling Zhao's helping in our own unique ways. There are different versions of this story since there are different translations. But this is the version that's in the resources for the practice period. And I'm aware that many people come to these Wednesday night talks or listen to them later who are not in the practice period. So I'll try to not be too referential to that because it's not necessary for this talk. So this is Ling Zhao's helping, one version of the story. Layman Pang and his daughter Ling Zhao were traveling along the road selling bamboo baskets. Coming down off a bridge, the layman stumbled and fell. Ling Zhao immediately ran to her father and threw herself down on the ground beside him. "What in the world are you doing?" cried the layman. "I'm helping," replied Ling Zhao. "Luckily, no one was looking," the layman said with a laugh. Maybe, especially if this is your first encounter with this story, you might think, what kind of helping is that? What good does it possibly do her father for her to throw herself on the ground next to him? I mean, why not just give him a hand up instead? How is this helping? And I invite you to really keep that question, how is this helping, with you as we continue through this talk. In the retreat, which ran from last Friday through Monday, we turned these koans in a lot of different ways. One way, of course, is Lectio Divina, which we do in the Hidden Lamp study group as well. But because we were together in this very beautiful place, we were able to do other things as well, more embodied encounters with these stories. And one of the ways we did that was by the participants broke into small groups to embody one of the stories. Each one was given a different one, and one group had Ling Zhao's helping. And I told them that they had very free rein to create a skit in response to the koan. It could be directly the koan. It could have other elements that were not necessarily there. And I thought that you might enjoy seeing what they came up with, the wonders of technology here. And I'll just say the sound is not great because it was recorded outside. And it will open with Ling Zhao and her father traveling down the path together. And you can't quite hear it, but they're actually singing, "We're off to see the Buddha, the wonderful Buddha of Oz." Just so you know, I wanted you to be able to fully experience that. It's very short, so Kodo is going to share his screen and let us see that little video.
Off to see the Buddha, the wonderful Buddha of Oz. Da 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 da. The Buddha of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does.
Daughter, what are you doing?
I'm helping.
Luckily, no one saw us.
Thank you, Kodo, for sharing that. I believe it or not, that we had two others that were even more ridiculous than that one. And nobody was injured in the making of that skit. Just wanted you to know, despite the falling. So back to this question. What is happening with this helping that you just saw manifested on the screen? Tonight, what I want to do is talk about both the beauties and joys of helping and the pitfalls of helping. And in this case, the pun is intended. And perhaps by the end, we'll have a more multi-layered sense of Ling Zhao's helping, what might have been going on there. I think we all know that there is great beauty in helping, in pitching in making a difference, to a single person's life or to potentially many people's lives. And there is joy. Studies have shown that people who engage in altruistic acts are actually happier than people who are mostly motivated by self-interest. I think this is good news for the world's religions, since pretty much all of them emphasize this aspect of being human. And it also seems to be really built into us. One of my favorite books is by Rebecca Solnit, a great writer who is also a Zen Buddhist. And this book is called A Paradise Built in Hell. And she really casts an historian's eye on a number of major disasters, many of which would be familiar to us, from the Mexico City earthquake, Hurricane Katrina, 9/11. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. And in each case, she describes how spontaneously, when the usual barriers between us break down in the middle of disaster, when there is such need everywhere, people naturally respond to each other in a spirit of altruism and helping. And in fact, although there are many people fleeing a disaster area, there are almost as many coming in to a disaster area to help. And we have this idea that when social order breaks down, it's just going to be anarchy in the worst sense of the word. But actually what happens is this outpouring of helpful and loving energy towards each other. I think this is really important to remember about who we are. However, there are other sides to helping, ones we know well and have probably experienced in our own lives, in our own journey through helping and being helped. Roshi Joan, as I was preparing for this talk, I was laughing because really she said it so well, it almost felt superfluous to give a talk on this. But for those of you who have not read her book, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet, I very much recommend it. And she writes in that book about what she calls edge states, using the image of walking a narrow ridgeline. And here is how she describes them. She describes a number of edge states in the book. The very first one is altruism, or helping. Empathy is another one. Integrity, respect, and engagement. Assets of a mind and heart that exemplify caring, connection, virtue, and strength. She goes on to write, yet we can also lose our firm footing, talking about falling down here, on the high edge of any of these qualities and slide into a mire of suffering where we find ourselves caught in the toxic and chaotic waters of the harmful aspects of an edge state. As far as I know, she's unique in speaking this way about what we consider such positive human behaviors and aspects. As I was preparing this talk and reading and thinking about it, I thought about 6 pitfalls, 6 edges of helping that we can fall into. And as I thought more about them, I realized that they really fell into 2 categories. The first category is the dualistic separation between helper and helped, and all the things that can come from that somewhat natural, but not inevitable understanding of what's happening when we're helping. And how that can lead to an attachment to our role, generally to the role of helper. I'm kind of focused on that side of it for this talk. And ultimately to resentment and burnout. And then that second major category is our discomfort with allowing the suffering and experience of others and responding to that by unsolicited help and fixing, to even to codependency, all the ways that in our own discomfort, we try to fix the other's suffering so that we will feel more comfortable again. That's what I want to explore today, how we fall down while helping. And I just want to say that if during the course of this talk, you recognize in yourself that you have indeed gotten caught in one of the pitfalls of helping, either currently or in the past, please, please congratulate yourself on being human. It is not only utterly natural for us to help one another, but it is equally natural for us to get caught in these, shall we say, less skillful ways of being with helping. There's another reflection in the book, in The Hidden Lamp, written by Blanche Hartman, Zenke Blanche Hartman, who was the abbess of San Francisco Zen Center. And she was talking about the precepts, which is about also how we behave and where we can get astray with the precepts. And one of the things that I loved is she said, it's like a sign on a frozen pond that says, danger, thin ice, rather than shame on you. So I invite you, as you're pondering about your own relationship to helping, to think of it more that way, not shame on you, but, oh, this is thin ice. So I'm going to start with this way, again, that's so natural, of having a sense of the helper and the helped, and why this can be problematic. And my favorite book, this is a book-heavy talk for some reason. My favorite book for this is by Ram Dass, and it's called How Can I Help? It came out quite a long time ago, before Ram Dass actually had his major stroke, and now, of course, he has passed away. But I think read it when it first came out, and it has remained a book that is always on my shelf and always nearby, because there is so much wisdom in it. Seems like an inexhaustible treasure trove of wisdom around helping. And I read it before I was as involved with what I would call the helping professions as I am now. And I just wanted to read a couple of things from the book that I thought really captured this well. And so I'll just read this paragraph here. Implicit in any model of who we think we are is a message to everyone about who they are. Caught in the models of the separate selves, then, we end up diminishing one another. The more you think of yourself as a, quote, therapist, the more pressure there is on someone to be a patient. The more you identify as a philanthropist, the more compelled someone feels to be a supplicant. The more you see yourself as a helper, the more need for people to play the passive helped. You're buying into, even juicing up, precisely what people who are suffering want to be rid of: limitation, dependency, helplessness, separateness. And that's happening largely as a result of self-image. And I'll talk a little more about the self-image and identification with role a little later. But there are ways through this, again, somewhat natural dualism that can develop. And there's a story that he tells in the same chapter.
Zenshin. Can everybody else? Is it just her that's frozen? Okay. Let me see if I can We were wondering if this might happen. Let me just see if I can call her. Well, I can't get a hold of her, so let's meditate. See if she comes back on with us. It was just getting good, too. I mean, the whole thing was good. Thank you, everyone. Ah, you're back.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What was happening when I stopped?
We were talking about Ram Dass and...
Okay. Was I just about to read the story about, okay.
Yeah.
Somebody's nodding. So great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm glad it didn't stop in the middle of the story is all I can say, because it's a great story. Here. So Ram Dass invited various people to write experiences from their own lives in helping roles. And so this is somebody's story who was a person who worked in a family services department where her job was to direct people to the right support services. And she considered herself basically a gatekeeper and found it pretty uncomfortable to be in that role. And then she met someone, a homeless woman, who moved her in some way. And she decided that for once, she was not just going to be the person who directed this woman to various parts of the organization, that she was going to engage with her directly herself. So that's where it'll start. There was this woman who was living on the street, one I used to pass on my way to the bus. She was homeless, alcoholic. Later, it developed she had had a cancer diagnosis. For some reason, I decided to take up with her, enough of sending everyone elsewhere. I knew the whole maze of social services. I'd take her around myself, clinics, shelters, Medicare, whatever. I guess I wanted to know you could help one person yourself. She was very uncomplaining, Viola. She was willing, even funny about it. Well, Marie, she'd say, what are you going to do for me today? So she takes her to all of these different places, but she keeps coming back on the street. She keeps drinking. She keeps relapsing in various ways. And Marie, who was the person trying to help her, would say, I try again. Look, Viola, I'd say. Look where, Marie, she'd reply. It became a kind of joke between us. Look where? She moved to a park near my house, and there she started to really go downhill. One evening, I went to see her, and she was sitting under a tree. She looked awful. I had this powerful feeling that she was getting very close to death. So I went through everything with her one more time, her drinking, her health, her eating, her shelter. She could come live with me. I'd reached that point of willingness. She just listened And finally she said, you know, dear, there's nothing you can do for me anymore. And I saw she was right. And I heaved this big sigh, just let go. About then, it started raining lightly. I finally said, well, it's getting late and wet. Shall we go get some coffee? She said, you go, Marie. I'll be all right here. I said, yeah, well, I'll see you later then. But somehow it felt to both of us like I wouldn't. I went to the bus and I was crying on the bus. I felt just brokenhearted. Then this thought came to me that she was out there alone in the rain, just that. So I got off and took the other bus back and went into the park with a newspaper on my head. I must have looked pretty funny. She was under the tree. She looked up at me. I sat down. She said, what are you doing here? I said, nothing really. I just felt like being with you a little more. She said, okay. So we sat in the rain. There we were. It was relatively dry because this was a big sycamore tree. I told her about how my father taught me to identify trees by their bark and how I loved trees and nature and felt happiest there. She told me about the desert. She used to live in Arizona. Her favorite place was the desert. It was so peaceful there. We watched the rain. We watched how the squirrels ran around and the last few people scurrying out. We watched how the park looked with no one in it. And I felt finally at peace. And we were both at peace. And we stayed silent a long time. I felt such love. She walked me to the bus. She said, thanks. I said, for what? She said, for nothing. We laughed. You've been very good to me, she added. We were teary. We hugged. Then I got on the bus and we waved goodbye. I never saw her again. I'll always love her. So I feel like that story is the perfect story of a journey from separation, from the helper and helped and all the frustrations of those roles to something beyond separation and beyond those roles. So thank you for your willingness to hear the long story. There's a famous quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, when the left hand is injured, the right hand takes care of it right away. It doesn't stop to say, I am taking care of you. You are benefiting from my compassion. The right hand knows very well that the left hand is also the right hand. There is no distinction between them. And then a very famous koan from the Blue Cliff record, case 89, about Avalokiteshvara, who I can see there through the doorway, Kanon, who's often depicted with 1,000 arms, each one to be helpful. Yunyan asked Dao Wu, how does the Bodhisattva of great compassion use so many hands and eyes? Dao Wu said, it's just like a person in the middle of the night, reaching in search of a pillow. That's simple. But when we don't see this, we become identified with our role as a helper. I have a lot of helping roles in my life. The daughter of an aging mother, minister, Zen teacher. These are quite powerful roles. These are roles that give me meaning and literally a certain amount of power. If you've had any of these roles or ones like them, you know what I mean. And breaking down attachment to these roles is difficult because they're seen by others and they're seen by yourself. Teaching, what I'm doing right now, is a form of helping. Over the last 6 months or so, I've had a really powerful experience of having that particular form of a helping role, the teacher role, change for me. I was invited by San Francisco Zen Center to offer an online class for people with chronic illness and pain, Zen practices and other practices that could be helpful. And I am a person who has experienced a lot of chronic illness and pain, which was a big part of the reason they asked me. And I was a little nervous about doing this. I'd never taught in this way. And I said yes, of course. And what I discovered is that I was one of them. I was not a person, a healthy person, talking to people who were experiencing chronic illness and pain. I was another person with chronic illness and pain, offering what I could. And they were offering what they could. They were offering their own wisdom. And it was a really different experience. And one of the things that it made me realize is that's possible in every moment of helping, because we're all in the soup together, different kinds of soup. I mean, their kinds of chronic illness and pain were not the same as mine, but we're all in the soup. And so we can reach out to each other across our soup bowls and help each other out. And the thing that can happen with this identification with role, with the sense of separation, of course, the kind of ultimate, the end state, really, of all that is resentment and burnout. And Roshi Joan tells a story in Standing at the Edge that I think really, I was really struck by it. She starts out by saying, when our altruism shifts out of selfless goodness into obligation, duty, or fear, we may start to churn with negative emotions. And then this is her story. I remember my first teacher, Zen Master Sun San, casually asking me how I had been spending my time. I listed all my recent good deeds. He paused after my recitation and growled, "You are a bad bodhisattva." I felt like I had been struck by lightning. With not a little bit of shame, I saw that by working to exhaustion for causes related to social justice, I was burning myself out and disempowering others by taking away their agency. And I love this next part. Moreover, I was probably trying to gain approval from my teacher and from others. I had a friend years ago who told me that he had become an ambulance driver when he was quite young, young adult, and that he decided to leave driving the ambulance, working on the ambulance as an EMT, when he realized that he was starting to resent the people that they were going to help. And I thought that that was really an action of great integrity, that he recognized that it was time. And of course, we have all had experiences in healthcare and otherwise when people did not either address that burnout and resentment, and it came towards us and came towards others who were vulnerable. If you feel this aspect of helping, this resentment that can come up keenly, I really suggest the grace training that is offered by Upaya. It's offered once a year, but you can take it at any time. If you haven't, I feel like I should just plan on once a year reviewing it because it's so powerful. And speaking of roles, of course, one of the big ones is that women are often not only in the helping professions, but are the primary helpers and caretakers in their families. And so this is particularly important work for us because we can get caught in that role as well. So then there's this other whole area, which it's all related, but how we struggle, how I struggle to allow the suffering of others. As I was working, but there's a positive side to it, right? Which is that there is a spontaneous response to suffering that can come up. So this afternoon, when I was finishing up this talk, a canyon towhee, beautiful little bird, flew into my room, and it got caught in the part of the room that had a window that couldn't be opened on one side and a mirror on the other. And it was just flying back and forth and smashing into the window and coming down onto the little bench and kind of breathing for a few minutes and then flying up and then flying over to the mirror and hitting the mirror and coming down. And I cannot imagine a version of myself or of any human being that I know who would not stop whatever they were doing to help that bird. I opened every door and window I could. And finally, the bird flew out with a triumphant chirp. It was the happiest chirp I've about ever heard. And so that's the positive side of responding to suffering. But this unwillingness to bear suffering leads to these less skillful ways of helping: separation, role identification, burnout, because we aren't willing to be present with our own suffering in the presence of another's suffering. Each of the stories, as I mentioned in The Hidden Lamp, have a reflection written by a contemporary teacher. And Ling Zhao's helping was chosen by Roshi Joan Sutherland, who used to just live down the road from Upaya and teach at the Cerro Gordo temple. And this is part of what she wrote on this aspect. Usually, the most intimate response to another's difficulty begins with the willingness not to flee. Fleeing can take the form of abandoning the situation, and it can also mean escaping into helping, into a whole constellation of ideas about what ought to happen. Intimacy is being willing to stay and accompany and listen, to be vulnerable and surprised and flexible. It's a willingness to fall with someone else and see what becomes possible when we do. This is pretty interesting. Fleeing can be both abandoning the situation and escaping into helping. I think we all recognize the fleeing from suffering, but the escaping into helping. I have seen this myself in relation to my mother, who is 94 and frail and losing her memory. And during the pandemic, I brought her to live with me for 4 months. And initially, I'm in charge of all her medical work, and in my own anxiety and wishing well for her, I would just, whenever I was around her, I was just running around trying to take care of things, just this and that, and her medications. And then I finally realized that what she really wanted was for me to be present with her. And I learned how to do that. And it transformed our relationship. To this day, I have learned not to be afraid of her dementia and her frailty, but to be fully present with her while she's still in this world. So back to what Joan Sutherland wrote about this koan. When Lingzhao throws herself down, her kindness is clear and unhesitating, completely without self-concern. It's also funny. Those are the qualities of her enlightenment. This is what it looks like when all the energy bound up in the small story we're constantly telling ourselves, in all our reactions and opinions and judgments, has been liberated into awakening. Just a little story here. That night during the women's retreat, after we had done the skits, we had a fire, a bonfire, and a lot of people, including myself, went to sleep early, but there were 3 women who were the organizers of this retreat, who live in this canyon. They call themselves the grandmothers of the stronghold. And they started talking about the koan and what was going on. They've been frustrated with it. And they were really talking seriously about it. And every time they came up with, well, what is this whole thing about helping? They would start laughing hysterically. This is what they described. I wasn't there. They said it was the biggest laughter, the longest laughter that they'd had in years. And then they would die down. And then somebody else would say, well, what about this helping? And they'd all start laughing again. And I said, well, it seems like you had a pretty direct connection with Ling Zhao and her father and their laughter. So remember, sometimes the best thing we can do is to fall down with one another. And if there's a little laughter along the way, that's even better. Or as, again, Joan Sutherland writes at the end of her commentary, At another level, Ling Zhao's gesture suggests that we are all falling together, lifetime after lifetime, through the universe. Right now, we are falling through this world, which holds out an invitation to us. Come see what life is like here. Well, I had a little poem for you, but we're just at 5 or at 6:30 your time. So I think I'll close with that, unless Kodo tells me I should read the poem.
No, read the poem.
Read the poem. Read the poem. Okay, you can all stay for another probably 3 minutes or something like that. Sure, I'll read the poem. Some of you may know this poet. You may even know this poem. It's a wonderful poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, who is a Palestinian American poet who has some connection, I think, to Zen. I know she's come and done poetry retreats at Tassajara. And this is my favorite of her poems. It's called Gate A4. You can decide how it's related to the Lingzhao. It is. I believe it is to the koan. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal, after learning my flight had been delayed 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of Gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing. Help, said the flight attendant. Talk to her. What is her problem? We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this. I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly in Arabic. The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, no, we're fine. You'll get there, just later. Who's picking you up? Let's call him. We called her son. I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane and ride next to her. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons, just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took up 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling of her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled out a sack of homemade mamul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts from her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo, we were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free apple juice from huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country tradition. Always carry a plant, always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in, the shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying of confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost.